But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win. We choose to go to the moon.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the 34th episode of the World Blockchain Roundtable. Today we have Greg from Rivet, Dave from Din.social, Sean, entrepreneur and friend to everyone, and I'm Joe, architect, founder of Dragonchain. Let's see here. Quick update on the Roundtable Layer ownership tokens distribution. Every host from last week will receive 222 lot. Every topic contributor will receive 41 lot. We got through a lot of questions last week. These ownership tokens come with perpetual passive income, free edits, and governance votes, which is very important. There is a new governance issue posted. Please go vote if you have any Roundtable lot. It is on the vote of the topics for next month. So basically every one of these topics was nominated by someone in the community. We added, I think, 5 new ones to the list. I think that's right. And one way or another, we will be rolling them out in the order that they win, right? So all of the topics this month were chosen in this way. Seems to work. Hopefully it works out. And let's see here. Topic of the week. Let's see here. Current events. Okay, so do we have anything that went on this week? I guess that was the first thing. We had the GI thing. Anything important that went on this week that you guys might have?
Probably. I was just posting this episode on LinkedIn and Facebook, just for exposure, and so I wasn't thinking about it. But yeah, this week, this week has for me. Just for a lot of different reasons. I couldn't even probably pick out one to talk about. But now that I've stalled long enough for Greg to have his microphone on, I will hand it over to you, and then I'll think about it again.
I mean, I'd say there were 2 big things that happened this week, but one of them was sort of the breaking of the myth that the Federal Reserve's shift in stance could do anything to halt inflation. Mm-hmm. We saw initially at the beginning of the year kind of a price drop in the crypto markets, and I'm sure everybody noticed that. But that correlated to a Fed announcement that's made them sound a lot more hawkish on inflation. And yet the inflation this month is worse than ever, or in December is worse than ever. And the fact that most of what we've got from them is talk and future plans indicates that it's going to be too little too late to really do anything.
That could be. I've seen similar stuff like, for example, the Fed abandoned the term transitory in their line of talking. I mean, it was what was transitory was them calling it transitory, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
And I definitely see people questioning the Fed more, like regular people, not libertarians, not Ron Paul followers, like regular. I mean, those are regular people too.
Oh yeah.
Like regular people who don't pay attention. I've seen a little bit of like the question mark, of like a conversation with my dad who doesn't even use computers and has never used a smartphone or been on the internet. Even he's like, this money thing's kind of fucked up, don't you think? And I was like, yeah, Dad. Yeah, it is. I know it is. And, and he was struggling with deciding what to do about it because on one end he's got, and this relates to the topic today, I think too, on one end, he's got, his government telling him that they're going to now spy on his bank account on any transaction over $600. And then on the other hand, he's got, well, if I take all my money out of the banks, it's still going to be just like, well, the conversation we got into was like, even if you take that money out of the bank, it's going to be sitting there losing value over time.
Yep.
So what does the average person do? You know what I mean? Damned if you don't do and damned if you don't kind of thing.
Right. Well, I think crypto is really a way out of that system, and people see that. You can see that so starkly with the release of these December numbers, because what happened is they released the December CPI, the December modified CPI. There were actually two versions of CPI that from 1990 and 1980, where you go back in time and use those versions and track them forward. Check out shadowstats.com, pro tip for anybody who wants to check that out.
I'll keep that in mind.
The old metrics show it much higher, but as soon as those numbers were released, you saw the market reverse. I mean, the people are keenly aware that this system is a system that is parallel to and not controlled by nation states, and that means the Fed can't fuck it up, basically.
That's the big thing, right? That's the big thing that I think is going to be the revelation for most people, and the turning point is that, and I don't know if that'll come after a nation like the U.S. or somebody outright tries to stamp it out and it doesn't work, and maybe that'll be the revelation where people are like, "What do you mean they can't stop it?" But as long as the four of us have been reading about this and thinking about it and trying to evangelize it, it's still day zero for most people. Like they're still just like, oh, crypto.
Yeah, a lot of people are going to wake up and be shocked that the dollar's not backed by gold.
True. I thought that was known. I thought people just knew that.
Absolutely not.
But
fact,
that's a good point.
Recently, I've talked to probably 3 or 4 young people in the past, just this month, January, and they've been really angry. They're like, "Why didn't they teach us that in school?" Goes, "Are you serious?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "No, not since it's like since the early 70s."
Yep.
And they have to look it up, and they're like, "I believe you. I just have to look it up."
Oh.
And they're mad,
Oh.
So it's a lot of people are waking up though. And a lot of what you guys don't like to talk about this, but a lot of it is dollar go up because people look down the rabbit hole for that, and that is honestly what brings so many people in and wakes so many people up, because they just have no idea, and they wouldn't if they wouldn't have thought, hey man, I can make a bunch of money on this crypto stuff just like all those bigwigs do. And then they're like, wait, this is how money works. What a
there should be an index on nation state banning or movements that should by any objective measure increase the value of Bitcoin, right? That oh gosh, they're doing that. This is my way out. I could move this over here, but I think it's probably some level. There has to be something in there that you have enough financial people that don't get the difference. They're just speculating in Bitcoin for reasons entirely unbased in not based in liberty, and therefore when China bans it, it actually drops in value. It makes no sense whatsoever to me.
Right.
But it doesn't follow these big like the messaging globally that you see in world events and things like that as much.
But Cyprus raided the bank accounts. I think it was Cyprus way back, right? I don't know what year it was, and it actually increased. That was when Bitcoin was I think it was maybe 2-digit value, maybe 3, but I just remember that was a point where I was like, okay, that makes sense. But then subsequent ones, the opposite happened. It didn't make any sense all of a sudden. So
yeah, that would have been like the second half of when I was in the Navy, second tour over there probably, because I remember because like I was active duty when Russia was invading Georgia, and I wanted to slide into the Russia thing right now because with Ukraine and the U.S.'s stance on that, it seems like that's at a standstill. Completely different topic, but current events. You've got this whole thing brewing between nation states, and then you have a technology that theoretically would liberate them from sanctions, or at least ease the burden that are caused by sanctions, while the U.S. is saying that military action to support Ukraine is off the table. We're just going to sanction the hell out of them if that happens. That's the messaging that I've seen. Like, they'll go in militarily for Taiwan, but they won't go in militarily for Ukraine. They'll just give them a bunch of weapons. Like, that's what I've said. So what happens when economic sanctions don't work anymore? Because you have nations like Iran who have added Bitcoin mining to. No, it didn't work, but it did. It did. I think it worked a little bit, man. Just because you can, like, it worked to the point. Maybe it didn't work for the governments for doing what they wanted to do, but you could see the effects on the citizens. You could see the effects on the little guy who had nothing to do with any of this.
That's what I mean. It hurt the wrong people. For sure.
They turned off the miners in Iran.
Did they?
For electricity, because they had some brownouts and they had a problem with their infrastructure. So that was the first thing they cut. Was like, hey, turn off all the miners.
That's appropriate. They did that in Texas too with the freeze, right?
So I thought that was telling that they weren't just so focused on the money that they did it, that it was something they turned off right away.
I think there's 2 points you have to make on this too, and I think it does connect up, Dave, more than really most people would initially think. Right? Energy is why these wars are happening. Why these little saber rattlers are happening. Right? For the most part, every battle that has been fought over the course of the last century and a half have been over access to natural resources, and oil being a big one of them. Right,
property rights,
and that has been a basis for backing the dollar, since the 70s. Like, you want to talk about what the dollar's backed by? It's backed by oil futures, or it has been.
This is what people have to use to trade in oil. Yeah, I get.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that's what Japan was after, was oil.
Right,
that was the biggest
sanction. Right, they hurt the people, but it's really just the same flavor of asshole that runs this system. In their countries, doing the same thing to the people that live in those countries. Like, the people of Iran, the people of China, the people everywhere else are a lot like us, sitting there watching these assholes up at the top do what they do, and crypto is a way out. I can see
looking at each other saying, what do we do? Like, what are our options, globally? I'm seeing that more than anything. And that's maybe, Sean, where, you were saying that I think you were just saying that it looks like there's more people waking up. Maybe that's, I think hardship drives innovation and creativity, because a lot of times you either have to innovate or die, and it's unfortunate that it works that way, but it does. People that are at the end of their rope do a very good job of putting aside all politics and just surviving.
Let's focus.
Speaking of innovate or die, I have a current event that I thought was interesting.
Dope.
Justin Sun, the hype man, which I don't think he's just a hype man, because he was a hype man during the ICO craze, during when crypto was hype. And I just did a video on this, but he, whatever the crypto sphere was at the time, I think that's just what he was. So people can joke about, announcements and all that, but that was what the time was about. That was what was bringing adoption. That was what was bringing people in. And now he is moving out of working on crypto projects. But he has been living in Grenada, and the government has just appointed him as the ambassador to the WTO.
Go figure. That guy
I think that's nuts.
That guy was totally like a walking fud magnet.
Well, I want to know, what did that position cost him? Because I guarantee he didn't.
That's another thing.
That's the right guy, and he
bought out. He bought out the next capsule for Blue Origin, $28 million.
Oh, no shit.
Him and 5 people. Yeah, I don't know if that's everybody, but he bought him and 5 people. Jesus. But I thought it was really just kind of blew my mind that, like, Sun. I mean, because it's like Sun, Vitalik. He's like a huge crypto, icon.
Yeah.
He's the ambassador to the WTO of a country now. That is just crazy.
Yep.
The only
that dude
probably the thing that bugs me about Justin Sun is not like, it's not bad. It's just that every time I'll use the word we. I don't want to do a we versus them thing, but like every time, oh man, like Warren Buffett like had a meeting with Justin's son, and that was just because Justin was the one that could throw down the money and go meet him. Everyone's struggling to get a message across to people who will listen, and then it's like, yeah, but Justin, I don't know, I just haven't seen a lot of.
That was an auction.
It was, and it's fine. It's the thing. He's got all his money, and he's using it.
Dude, do you know what happened because of that?
No, I don't.
The Chinese government, they kidnapped his like all of like co-workers, a bunch of people. That's why he canceled the first time. He was in San Francisco.
That he said that. I just didn't know.
Stones. I heard he had.
Oh
stones.
yeah, I have kidney stones, and then he went to a party that night with BitBoy and a bunch of other people that I know, and they were like talking to him. He was like, he was depressed. He wasn't in pain. He was freaked out and depressed. It was obvious. And then he canceled the lunch, and then everything was fine.
Huh. Well, that's valid. He should have just said he was anxious and depressed and needed to take a mental health break. I do that all the time.
He said what the Chinese government told him to say.
All right, let's go to that Tom Emmer. Sorry, we had it up, and this was basically current event that ties into this week's topic, subject, whatever you call it. That he put out, he introduced a bill to prevent the Fed from issuing a central bank digital currency directly to individuals. I don't know if it means that he wants it to be run through the Treasury Department instead, probably as it should be, since they're the ones that are supposed to mint coin, right? But anyway, it's very interesting, especially the very last statement in the tweet that about authoritarianism, and basically it was a really good statement to prioritize blockchain tech with American characteristics. And whether you call it American characteristics or characteristics that are more appropriate to blockchain, which would be liberty and transparency, that's it was a very interesting point to come this early out of. Dude,
that's such a sad statement you just made.
What's that?
Well, you call it American
I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that
you kind of are, and that is true. That literally was what American meant. Liberty, transparency, freedom, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well,
I mean, that's that. There's this. I haven't actually read this tweet yet, but that's that. I mean, this is informed stuff. This. I think what Tom's saying is important.
He's always been on the right side, at least a few years back. So always been interested, but I haven't followed him closely enough. And this was just, it's like, okay, he's on the right track here. This is not backwards. This is not fluff. Because some of what I wanted to talk about on this show, and why I didn't skip, even though I think I have the flu, is that CBDCs can be really scary depending on how they're put together, right? But there is an angle that you can actually use it if you're in what otherwise would be a banana republic, no matter where you are. That you could, if you want a legitimate offering, provide better value to your citizenry and likely pull some small nations out of poverty. You could actually create wealth if you do this right, and a lot can be said to that. But you have to go in with a principled look. You can't just say, oh, let's do what we're already doing, but have massive surveillance power on top of it, right? So anyway, that's
I think creating a CBDC merits like ground up design, not whatever we're doing now, but on blockchain.
I think there are two ways one can take this. Like, I love what he's saying. I love the words he's using. I don't know that I love any legislation that says the government or an affiliated entity cannot do something. I love those kinds of rules. That's the kind of rule I can get behind. Make all of those rules that say the government may not get involved with this. But then there's another perspective, right? There's another angle one can take. Even getting involved at all brings the possibility of future modification. Like, all it takes is another bill that says something different or makes one line strike and one edit. And all of a sudden it becomes the thing everybody was worried it could become. Our protection, if it's not in a constitutional amendment, is very thin against change. And so I think it's kind of dangerous at all to have the government get involved legislatively, administratively, whatever, with crypto at all. So
As
I think
usual, Greg makes a really good point, man. You know, when things are being thrown around like stacking the Supreme Court or killing the filibuster, it's like you realize just how fragile everything is without having that Constitution. I remember it was like a year or two ago, and I laughed out loud in my living room because I thought it was a joke, and then it's not a joke. Boris Johnson, he was it was like he put like Parliament from their like opening out to like after the Queen's speech, which he had to go and ask for permission to do to the Queen before he could do this as a prime minister, which shows the Queen is not just a figurehead, but that's a different thing. So he did this. It was during Brexit, and it had something to do with putting the vote out, and everyone was pissed off. And there was an MP, and he was like, "This goes against our unwritten Constitution." And I was like, "Unwritten Constitution, this is fun." And then someone else said it, and then the reporter said it, and there's people on the street. They're like, "Blimey, I'm so mad! It goes against our unwritten Constitution." That's a real thing, and that's not what makes it a constitution is it's written. If not, it's just a suggestion or
I don't know. That's
tradition.
You
know
talk
what
to
else?
like a classical Rome that they did. It wasn't written. It was known. There were rules, and they were bendable depending upon who you were and who you knew, right? And I've read a lot way back that was a massive difference. That back then, if someone, if you were a merchant, selling sandwiches on the street, somebody tripped over a box in your facility, you were screwed if they were because you didn't have any way. You didn't even know what the laws were, right? It was just nope. This guy doesn't like you. We're gonna do whatever.
Charge you with the unwritten law.
A written, and you think about it, it's in my opinion, a written constitution is a very early form of what we now think of as transparency in the rules in a smart contract. I mean, and to answer what Greg would say, I mean, the ideal is to bootstrap smart contracts. So start writing some of these laws as smart contracts where you have governance applied that is transparent, that it can't be changed by some obscure Senate rule that lets them do something in the middle of the night that we don't know about. I just read a report linked from 4chan last week that said I think it's either 78 or 82%. It was somewhere in that range that generally Congress does not follow the will of the people approximately 3/4 of the time. And that's generally because it's just an accident for the other quarter where the lobbyists happen to also be able to use the fact, oh, everybody wants this also. I'm giving you money, but I mean, effectively, it's all the republic's dead. It's all controlled by the lobbyists. And it's because it's not transparent, right? We don't even know who the lobbyists are.
Right. And now we have this other problem of a completely untransparent communications cartel going on. Like, how the hell is it that the messaging that seems to benefit power in every case happens to be so unilateral at such opportune moments across the mediaverse? Like, how is it that they're coordinating this? I don't know. And it's damn near impossible to track down because the contracts, if they exist, are private.
Can I tell you, when anybody who's old enough to remember the politics from the 80s through, right, that everything used to be 4 channels, right? So it was 4 channels on TV. That's all you had. You had nothing else, right? You might have local stuff, right? But it was extremely centralized, and it was controlled back then. It was still they couldn't, I think, legally distribute propaganda as the U.S. government at that time, not until the 90s, right? But the interesting thing is with cable, that changed, right? It's like, all of a sudden CNN, all of a sudden other things were there, which was an interesting time because you could see stuff more readily than you could before. Then they added C-SPAN, and I can't remember, I think it's Brian Lamb who started that whole thing. C-SPAN was freaking amazing in the 80s and 90s. I mean, it was very interesting to watch, but maybe boring, but still super interesting because you would see everything. And
it is boring, but it was so exciting. I remember.
Yeah,
But
and then
see-
the internet, and then all of a sudden
Yeah.
came out, and now they really have tried to consolidate that back, and with big tech, you're pretty much back where you were with the four networks.
Oh,
It's
guys, I got
effectively
a
all
story
sources.
I got to share about this. So I worked for the Indiana legislature as a contractor for a while, and then as part of the technical team meant to help the House and Senate operate their technology stacks, right? Like me and Austin both built a voting system with them. Austin and Beth, all three of us. We built the systems that they use in their chambers to vote on bills. And the project went terribly at first until we figured out what they were trying to build was a stage show system to stage manage the whole affair of being public and on camera. What they are doing when they go into private closed caucus meetings is orchestrating the stage show. The things that are really happening that cause things to actually move and that cause things to actually pass and cause things to actually get selected for the agenda, that stuff is still hidden. The fact that there are these transparency mechanisms, right now are not, it's not deeply integrated, and the parts that are transparent are actively and very thoroughly and thoughtfully designed.
Wow.
So let's put that out there.
That's super interesting. It makes sense too, right?
Have y'all watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier?
I have finally.
Yeah, me too. Finally. And I watched the last episode last night at like 3 a.m. That's why I got here like at the last minute. But I'm watching it with my son, and the whole thing is about how after half the universe has disappeared for years, and then they come back, and then like people come back and they go to their house and like, hey man, well, you're in my house. This is my house. And how when it happened, it brought the entire world together, and like borders weren't important, and these little things weren't important. It was we united us as a people. Borders weren't that bad. Everyone could help each other. And then when everyone came back, all of a sudden it was like instant. Everyone's like, hey man, this is our country. These people. So all these people that have been living here are now refugees. And the last episode of the show, there's this big whatever government organization that's about to do terrible things to people, and they're having this big meeting, and it's completely in private, and they're just like, screw these people, and some people are like, we don't have food and stuff in these camps that we're setting up yet. And he goes, how much food do they really need? It was just, but to see it, I was like, this is
how it goes down.
What it's all about, man. Look at this. They do it or saying all this like it's just because there's no transparency. No one can see this.
Well, that's why I appreciate the art so much, is because you can say things like that, and you can get an idea across into someone's head that where they may not have thought about it. If you had been direct in saying, "Hey, have you ever thought about how screwed up it is? How decisions get made around here? Blah blah blah, earmuffs." But a beautiful piece of artwork that says the same thing, maybe that's absorbable.
Also, it shows when you see a person and they watch that, you can kind of really tell the person that they are, because some people are like, man, it's really messed up, and then some people are like, yeah, it's the way it is, man. And like, I understand, and I've made this point that every single person that posts a meme and says, Epstein didn't kill himself, every person is saying, I know how bad things are. I know there's like a shadow government running things. I know. I mean, it's like here, this one meme, it means all that. And they're like, I know, but that's the end of it. So
I think that's an important way of communication too. Like that, I don't know how much that affected everyone's reluctance to read into it, but you had people printing on the bottom of beer cans from their factories that said Epstein didn't kill himself. And so this sort of like passive messaging, it's almost like a temperature check to be like, hey, nobody wants to say it out loud, but if you happen to know that, like, oh wait, you guys think the same thing, it's not such a fringe idea.
It's been going on for so long too, because people, if you remember in the 90s, I told the guys at work, it's like, oh yeah, McDougal, how long does he have to live, right? And they forgot to give him his heart medicine, right? And it's like that was in the 90s, but finally, I think for whatever reason, popular culture just woke up a little bit about Epstein because it was just a little bit too damned obvious, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, could this guy testify in public court? Inevitably, unless he died, right?
Well,
like,
by the way, let's do a real quick rundown
convenient.
of the Maxwell trial. Just happened.
Sure.
Press didn't cover it for anything.
Oh, they banned accounts on Twitter who were covering it.
Yeah.
It was freaking crazy. They put Comey's daughter in charge of the prosecution, who had already lost a bunch of the CD-ROMs of the evidence, and at the end of it, I don't know, I can't remember what even happened, but it was so meaningless, and then it's all closed up. It's like, you don't need to see any of this. We took care of it. Justice has been served, right? Yeah. And it's just like, come on.
The for your own good stuff where they don't tell you what was in there, right? Mm-hmm. That kind of thing.
Well, there has to be something. I mean, it's just like, okay, it's hilarious now. It's turning into a freaking comedy. It's so sad. The whole thing is just nuts.
Yeah, and it's and I don't know if it's. I used to think people in government were just stupid, and I've kind of come around to realizing that they're not. They're just a different kind of stupid. Maybe they just.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, because Greg has kind of changed my mind that they're stupid, because I always thought they're stupid. I think they are stupid. I think they're empty-headed.
I don't think so. I've worked with a lot of people in government. Stuff. It's just a different culture. They don't care about the things that you would think they'd care about. Well, they care about, I'm now a government employee, so I'm going to keep doing this, and as long as I don't screw these things up, I'm good, right? Doesn't mean I have to be efficient. Doesn't mean I have to actually serve the people. Doesn't mean I have to even pretend to actually observe my oath, right?
And how do you draw a line between serving the interests and protecting the Constitution, protecting the society that is founded by a constitutional document, and the state, which is a totally different thing. State security is far different from national security. They're two different animals, and they're really hard to differentiate between, even if you're looking out for it. But if you've got a feed my family type economic incentive to do your job, when you are faced with a request from on high to serve state security as opposed to national security, and you think they kind of conflict. Like, you have to be prepared to pull a Snowden if you want to. And not everybody has the morals and ethics, but also the life position to do that. He didn't have to take care of like an elderly grandparent or a sick son or anything like that. Snowden could leave and it hurt his family, but he didn't. Well, he didn't consign anybody.
There's a lot to that kind of thing. Like when you do what Snowden did, and to an extent, I don't even think that it's necessarily a bad thing that you might get punished for being a whistleblower, but that has its limits. That's very much got its limits. You shouldn't be killed for it. Yeah. But if there was no backlash at all, then there's no possible way to like keep state secrets. And I think some state secrets are worth keeping. You can't just have everybody being like, oh, I'm whistleblowing, and then there's no backlash, because then you can't keep your shit together as a country. But the extreme, we've assassinated people with drones that were American citizens without trials. Mm-hmm. Under the Obama administration, we did that. Right.
So a whole protocol for it, like a meetings where they said, "This is how we get to do this." This is who's in charge of
whoever it was talking about federal versus state and unwritten constitutions. What is written that I believed until recently was a thing that people is that the states' rights and the federal rights. The Constitution does say that anything that's not specifically stated is a federal power is reserved for the states. So it does kind of say, even without saying like states get this specific right, if it doesn't say that the federal government gets that right, it does literally say anything not explicitly given to the federal is reserved for the states. But none of that matters. Apparently,
that amendment has never really been tested in court either, right? Like the 10th Amendment has never been the basis for somebody halting some action that was violative of some other right. If you look at the Supreme Court jurisprudence on it, it's empty.
I haven't,
which is the weird thing. Like that was what when we talked about that when I went to law school, we got to the 10th Amendment. We were like, we're going to spend a couple hours on this. We're going to move on to the next thing because there just isn't anything. We're going to talk about why there isn't anything and how weird that is for a little bit, but that's all.
That is weird.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to, before we go to the questions, because we need to get to them pretty soon. I think a lot of those people too, you have to think about it. I can't remember the quote where, an honest man is not going to disagree with his where his paycheck is coming from. That and a lot of these people, I think by definition, can't respect the Constitution because they wouldn't actually be in that position if the Constitution were actually honored. And anyway, so all right, you go to the questions and refresh, and then we'll try to get through them quick, right? Let's see. First question. Dragonverse, what impact will CBDCs have on the crypto market and long-term future of crypto? What do you guys think?
I think it'll affect, hopefully, it will ease on and off ramps. I'm hoping that if the government has their own like layer of go-between between different systems and different companies, that maybe they're a little bit more willing to let us do it, could be one thing that to look forward to. But on the other hand, it's like it's the danger of anti-privacy tech being bolted onto all of this as well. Right. If you look at how it's being designed, just like whoever you had up earlier, Tom, what was his name? Emmer was saying, it's like if we just copy what China's doing, then it's going to be not as good as if we design it as an American system, that kind of thing, with American values.
There are two ways I think this can go, right? Like if you use the innate capability of a distributed ledger tracked system to build a cartel controlled, banking cartel controlled, permissioned blockchain, right? And you have your central bank digital currency on that, and your goal is to shut down the rest of crypto. Well, now you can actually see where all of those spends are happening and stop them. You could actually ban the purchase of crypto and pull it off if you had a central bank digital currency system installed the wrong way. Now,
like if you do, like I think that's, we talked a little bit about China banning, Bitcoin and maybe getting rid of cash so that they do have the only option for currency.
But if they embrace it as an open system, if they say we're going to make central bank digital currency ERC20 compatible, and we're going to try to make it so that it interoperates with all of the other systems that the private currencies are using, then you have a completely different set of opportunities. And that's, I think, where it could be good if the way that it's done is not intentionally exposed to corruption by the people who would prefer systems stay corrupt.
Aye, and if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a wagon.
Right, exactly.
I think one of the huge things that's going to happen really first is it's going to have it's what it's going to do to stable coins. There's so many questions then, because then it literally is making your own money. Because the CBD, what's the difference between a CBDC and a stable coin? So that's one of the biggest things. I mean, you could even make in the argument that it's counterfeit, that now USDT, USDC, it's a counterfeit dollar.
That's the argument I already make about most of the money being printed right now. They're just the counterfeiters have gotten a hold of the press, the printing press. They're just making really good counterfeits. Sorry, I was interrupting.
Well, I mean, one other piece could be potentially if they used some combination of crypto to back it, right? I mean, they wouldn't have to just use precious metals or blood. You can actually back it with something, or even if it's a mix. The interesting piece is, though, if they issued it, it would be the dollar. So if it's the Fed, they're going to want the ability to change inflation rate and do various things like that. But the positive side of it is if it was done with the right philosophy, when I say right, with the philosophy that I would prefer, that transparency would be controlled. You would be able to look at it and know actually how many are going to be created, and they could even work in that any change to that will have this amount of notice, and it won't be some interpretation of the Federal Reserve sitting in front of Congress. It would be in code. I can see exactly what's going to happen, and I can make whatever decisions I need to make based upon that in advance, and it's clean. It would be not so much like Bitcoin, but it would be far better than what exists currently with fiat. That there'd be something real there, and it might not be the U.S. or Britain or China or Russia that does this. My goal would be, it would be beautiful to see smaller countries do this that are not wealthy right now, because it would change that entire economic climate. And
it's not all just like scary stuff to me too. There's a bunch of positive stuff with CBDCs that I can think of. Like, think about, this pandemic situation where we have a bunch of checks that go out to people. My neighbor across the street, it took him 2 months to get his check, his relief check. You know what I mean? If we were on some sort of CBDC, whatever version of it we come up with, think about how quickly people could get relief and how quickly funds could go to municipalities from the state or the federal and things like that. The rails.
Is that a bug or a feature, right?
It's a feature, in my opinion. It's just like replacing the system that we have now with a cryptocurrency or a blockchain-based system would, regardless of what a lot of people like to say, it would be a much more environmentally friendly way to run our monetary system. Right. Money's filthy. You have
if we're talking about an absent policy, right? If we're talking about the same people running the system the same way, and would it be an improvement? Yes, I would say it's a marginal improvement over. And a fairly significant one if you're talking about people who don't have to file federal tax returns being able to get relief checks, but maybe it's not so good that we make a system of inflating the money supply easier. Maybe that's actually the way that you'll end up destroying the value of it faster and faster.
I think of it making it more efficient for the end user, not necessarily easier for the controller of it.
But did it take 2 months for your neighbor to get his money because of the system, or because
he doesn't pay taxes
run by the government?
He wasn't in the system already for paying taxes on his federal. So because he didn't pay taxes regularly enough, he didn't get it in time. He had to go through extra hoops, because what they did was they took, there was this, I don't know if you remember, but there was this.
Right. They means tested it. So they'd check with the IRS.
Yeah, they means tested it basically. And they used tax returns to do the means testing. But a lot of people don't pay their taxes because they don't have any money to pay them with, right. And they don't, or they don't want, there's a lot of people that just don't make enough money to pay taxes, or, so they just don't file them.
Right. And also a lot of people on Medicaid disability are exempt from filing. Basically a lot of people in very vulnerable situations.
It would assist that. And I think even if it wasn't privacy based, a privacy coin where it had as much privacy as a paper dollar, there's still not, there's a lot of gray area in between, because what if it doesn't go directly to each end user from the central bank? What if it still goes to privately owned banks? And then there's some semblance of privacy with your local branch of your bank, and then they do the interactions with the federal.
And that is, by the way, the efficiency, if as long as it's transparent and well governed, because say here in Washington State, with the COVID and all the extra unemployment relief that they sent out, locals couldn't get it. They were all delayed. I knew people that were delayed, even friends of my kids and stuff. And yet they literally had a Nigerian prince scam run against the state. Hundreds of millions of dollars went to Nigerian scam artists. And there's not even ever been any justice and nobody's even looked into it. It's crazy.
Yeah, the amount of money that just gets lost by the people who control it. And they're just like, oops, I don't know. And that's it. Right. Our money.
And to me, this raises the whole question that nobody seems to be ready to ask yet, but I think it needs to be thrown out there. do we need a central bank? Like, isn't that what crypto in its best form replaces?
Well,
Like,
speaking of the Constitution,
do we really need that?
Yeah, speaking of the Constitution, are you supposed to have it? Right?
Right.
It's not supposed to be there. So I don't even think it's constitutional that they could give that power up. Right? It is literally solely with them. So
I mean, the country has still existed for longer without central bank than with. So
okay.
It's not
Next question. Chupacabra. How can a CBDC be good for a country's citizens in any form? I believe they're a direct attack on humanity. We've lost why crypto was created. I do think that's true in a lot of places. We give them a powerful tool that they then will now use against us. That's why you have to, like, say, the stuff with Emmer, people need to start watching, because if he's putting that up there, it's because there's somebody's actually talking about it behind the scenes.
I'm glad there's a conversation about it.
Right.
It's important.
So I guess open, borderless, neutral, censorship resistant, and public. I mean, ideally, if they could mimic cash, it would be best. That I can still pay someone to mow my lawn without with the surveillance. Right? You should be able to do that. I don't know. Anyway, what do you guys think? I mean, we kind of talked about this.
If I were on here to be polemic and shout and scream my opinion as loud as I could rather than have a conversation, I would probably sound a lot like Chupacabra right now. I kind of feel the same way about central bank digital currencies.
Honestly, yeah, I felt the same way coming into this. I'm like, we're not going to be able to talk about this for an hour. There's no way. Everyone's going to be like, it sucks. They're terrible.
There are hypothetical cases where you could see a benefit happening if hypothetically government behaved properly. But if you look at history, that's a long way for a train don't come, right? When it really comes down to it, it's set in, even if it's set up right at first, it doesn't do anything but start a ball rolling down a hill that will ultimately lead to someone diverting it to corruption. And that was ultimately one of the earliest sort of anti-federalist arguments against central banking that took place even during the founding. There were a couple failed experiments even prior to the current central banking system that we have that failed, and they failed for this exact same reason.
It failed the same way this one failed?
Well, this one has been pretty effective at stringing us all along, but quite similar.
That's because they control a lot more than just the central bank. If it is, I have no idea if it's the same people controlling media and the central bank and politics, then that's a.
I think Dave really has hit that question on all the positive notes that it could be already. Yeah.
I try to think positively. I try to, One thing I will say is that who was this that posted this? Chupacabra. Yeah, and thank you, Chupacabra. One thing that Chupacabra says is that a CBDC doesn't meet these, pillars of a cryptocurrency. They're not a cryptocurrency. That could be completely true. Maybe it's a central bank digital currency that doesn't meet the criteria of what one would expect. Maybe technically it is, but maybe it doesn't meet the criteria of what one would expect of a cryptocurrency. And so we shouldn't call it one, just so that we don't confuse the a central bank digital currency is going to be the first impression a lot of people get of cryptocurrency, right? So the messaging on that's going to be interesting to see how that affects people's opinion of this industry.
Right, and if it were a central bank cryptocurrency or a nation state issued cryptocurrency instead of a central bank digital currency, maybe that would be better. You could probably make a case for a digitization of the central banking function in a series of smart contracts built on a smart contract platform, right? That was public and permissionless and community governed. I think you could make that case. And I also think that that even if you let them run it and control it, as long as you have a system that allows competition, you'll at least end up with some kind of Hayekian advantage in competitive currency dynamics. Like, it will have to compete with the others. And in that way, I think it could still be good. That would be like, if it competes with the others, then I'm less afraid of it.
And it also depends upon whether it is the central bank. In our case, the Fed versus the Treasury Department. there's a meaningful difference between if one of them actually put this in place rather than the other. And I have no idea, there are some real politics behind that we'll never know who controls it. But those things come together, and when you think about some small country, it's somewhat the same thing. And it could be something that gets them invaded too if they do the wrong thing, right? If they, it's like, no, we're going to have our treasury issues, new currency is going to compete against what our central bank was doing or is doing, and that might be impossible without some, major.
I haven't thought of this, but can you imagine like a shooting war, like to go in and just take someone's cold storage, basically? Like,
yes, you can't. And I think it's more like what happened with Libya.
It's like taking their gold.
They go in and they topple Gaddafi and grab the gold and get out, right? And it's the same.
Right.
Same
or
thing.
like blowing town from,
leave a few people behind, fire some cruise missiles into it for good measure. Yeah, I was there.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Next question. You go to the next. That was a good point, and I agree. If we don't pay attention, you have to assume that the worst will happen, and they will implement the worst possible thing. So
hope is definitely not a strategy for letting this turn out okay from a public engagement standpoint.
Right.
That's for sure.
So, Angel Breaker, CBDCs and the lack of privacy and a transparent money flow. So, how would you guys handle that? Because there is the notion that you want the transparency of how the system is run, but at the same time, if I pay, if I pay someone something, I don't want my neighbor to know how much I'm paying, right, or what I'm buying. So, how do you reconcile that?
I would say this is an opportunity to acknowledge a big policy failing of basically since the 1970s. We've had this idea that you can use anti-money laundering and rules like that to actually forestall crime. And it doesn't work. Like there's actually no statistical proof that it's done anything other than raise the cost of compliance for banks, the cost of entry for new competition, the rate of innovation, and the job market for people with compliance officer in the title. That's all it seems to really do. And we've kind of blindly said, more of this is good, but why? Like it doesn't actually prove itself to be valuable, and it's proven itself to be quite costly. This is a chance for us to say, nope, actually we're going to go back to private money.
Right. Yeah, I will say, because I don't know that we've ever said that. It's somebody else who said, oh, we need AML, we need this, we need that. And You're right.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's the same thing across the board with any other surveillance, that the reason that you have some of the surveillance that we now live under with Patriot Act stuff is, the fear of these terrorists. And yet it's demonstrated directly that anytime there has been an issue, whether it was anthrax, whether it was John Muhammad with the blue car, or whether it was the Boston marathon bombing, it's been worthless. They're listening to every conversation on earth, and yet when something actually happens, they still have to go out to the public and say, hey, have you guys seen any of these people? We need to know who they are. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You've been watching them the whole time. There's no way you haven't. And yet, why is it being stored? It's being stored for other reasons.
Right, sophisticated bad actors going to work around it.
Yeah, that they can.
It's parallel reconstruction.
Well, it's not even that. It is literally that they are storing this history of everything on Earth, so they can crawl through and find where you've done something they don't like. Or sorry, if you've done something they don't like, they can find out which of the ridiculous number of laws you have violated, and then throw the book at you.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. How let's say that's a CCTV system, right? How long is the loop? How long do you think the records go? Because you have a storage issue, and that was the initial thing. I was kind of like, whenever the Utah data farm was being built, was one of the things that came up. It's like, okay, well, based on the amount of square footage and, like you can take aerial photos and you can estimate how much they can fit in there. And they were like, all right, well, with that, it would be like 2 weeks or whatever. What do you think that the rollback is? What do you think that the amount of time that can be, like, how far can we go back in time to see like what somebody was doing? You know what I mean?
If I were to build it and you had actual scarcity, which I actually don't think they have scarcity, because I think they have other places to put stuff. But if they have any scarcity, it's tuned. They're going to figure out, okay, depending upon your some equivalent of a social credit score, you're going to be held indefinitely. Whereas somebody who is doesn't make any political comments or anything else, it's like maybe it is limited. Who knows? Scary stuff. Anyway.
Well, they would have to use. Well, there are technologies like DNA storage. They could have something like, okay, let's offload all of our hard drives to DNA storage, which we may never go back and look at. But if we did, we could go back and resequence it and get the info out of it.
Well, when you look at it, have you guys read Snowden's book, Permanent Record? Like that.
I have. I've read it.
Yeah. So I got a lot out of that book personally. They have information stored back as far as they can store it at this point, right? Like if you were born in the 90s, there is a record on you that began before you were born, and it only just got more robust over time. That we don't live in a world where you say something and you're on the list. We live in a world where you're on the list already because everybody's on the list. They're gathering all the data. The question is, where is their attention focused? And as soon as their attention focus is on you, then they go back and they have all this history. I don't think that there's any chance that they wouldn't, whether they did it on some secondary system so that they could skirt the particulars of the law.
Yeah,
or,
they probably
or on the
prune
system
data
itself.
too. They probably prune data that you logged into Facebook, in 2003 or whatever, But yeah,
It's a permanent record. It's going to be a permanent record if we do this. Like it's going to.
Yeah, on the pruning thing, I was thinking about like on the CCTV stuff. I mean, AI could go through, and if nothing's happening, or 20 hours of that 24-hour period, they could cut it. There's nothing that happened, and then you're left with a lot less data to store.
All right, next, GP12X. Since most U.S. currency is created digitally, isn't a CBDC just a better form of the existing currency? I would want to know semantics. Why would we not call what we already have a CBDC? It's controlled, it's digital, various. It doesn't have a blockchain, but
I think it's because it's not. It isn't that to the end user. Probably is the difference. Like it is that to the banks. They just get debitable accounts.
The trick is really the double entry bookkeeping ledger truing up system. Basically, when banks close their books at the end of the day and then do their settlements, they're doing a complex process of cross-checking with every other bank that they transacted with to make sure that those records are correct. And there's so much room for human error in that there aren't assumptions that you can make out of the data, right? That you could make if it was a single ledger that you could prove was valid. Like if you actually had that built into the system, there'd be a lot more assumptions they could make about the data they're seeing than currently. Because right now they have to assume that what they're looking at is an approximation of the current state based on a system that is labor intensive and error prone. So they can't say for a fact that this person doing that to that person actually happened, or that those amounts are correct. Right, and that's really kind of like the overhead of organizing that and truing it up requires investigation, and so they can't run it with an automated system fully.
They could probably have all these things that take forever to get numbers out to people. They could probably have more meaningful numbers in closer to real time for things like inflation and emission rate and people that are drawing unemployment and people that are whatever. All that stuff is more. It's just more efficient. Like if we take out the politics of or not the politics, but the reality of how it could go wrong. I mean, on its face, it's like just like streamline everything. If you did it like I don't know, like Libra, Facebook's Libra. You know what I mean? That would still I don't want that, but that would still be like a super fluid environment.
And if they did nothing but one-to-one change it out for the existing system so that the numbers you're seeing are registering from that instead of what they currently use.
What I would like to see is traceability of taxes. That's the one thing that it would be at the top of my list is like, okay, the government can trace everything and see where everyone's spending their money, and the government can see you and okay, I don't want that. But if we're going to do that, can I at least see where the hell my tax dollars are going? Literally the rails on where they went and what projects and like everything would be fantastic. Flip that over and let me have transparency into your accounts and in your spending habits.
Dave, you just hit on something that I could say is a legitimate thing I hadn't thought of. That is a genuine advantage to something like this existing.
Oh, gotcha.
Right.
You didn't start from scratch. I talked to the guys
tax
from,
control is the
you guys
concept
remember Liberland, I think that's what it was called. That was in some little space in Eastern Europe,
like Croatia.
And they were going to create a government from scratch, right? And when I was still at Disney, I was talking to them because I was like, guys, if you're going to do this, you need to trace that. And that's forever been my angle on this, that if you had a new nation state, that for one thing, your voting could be provable. But the interesting thing about it is that the funding would be separate from the voting, the approval. So I could approve a war, but if I'm a student and I don't put money into the system, I can't finance it, right? So it would actually require me to help govern where this money is spent, right? It's like I'm paying more taxes, so I should be able to say we should build that bridge. That would be more appropriate to the value of our country, right?
That would help keeping value local too. If people locally had influence, like, oh no, we need to build a bridge here.
And it would reduce the effect of lobbyists, which is one of probably the biggest issues with the fact that Washington, D.C. is so centralized. And it's really funny, if you work in any federal projects, they get angry when part of the work is done in another state. If it's not done in Northern Virginia, Maryland, D.C. itself, they think it's just shit. And they hate on it, and they push forever for it to be brought back in. Why? Because they want those trillions of dollars all to be spent in that little bitty area in the country.
Right.
And the rest of the country doesn't quite get that. It's like
Boeing's space business model, basically.
I lived there for a while. It's crazy. There's so much freaking money there.
Yeah, and you think about it, it's the government is what's the count? How many 100,000 people work for the federal government? It is radically high, and that doesn't even include what would be like, say, Lockheed and Northrop, and because Lockheed has hundreds of thousands of employees, which are only there because it's direct in with the public sector. So it's an issue, and any level of transparency would help it, because people would see, was like, wait a minute, none of us want that. Everybody knows that nobody wants this thing to be done, yet some lobbyist came in and was able to go through every single member of Congress until they get a few people that would accept the money, and it happens, right? And we have no visibility, we have no control over that. That's the big issue. But,
I haven't thought of this specifically before, but it sounds like what you're talking about is decentralized lobbying, basical just give that out to all of the individual citizens. Mm-hmm. If you have a way to make it work, JP12X says that lobbyists would just have to lobby the wealthy at that point. They would become politicians of their own.
The funniest thing too is that at least from what I've seen and what I know, that you could very well put a lot of these controls on it. And frankly, things like you think if we were the founding fathers and we had the technology that we have today, right? What would you do? And I think some of it would be the opposite of what we see. I think everybody would agree. The 3-letter agencies would not be surveilling us. They would be surveilling those people who are servants to us currently, that, okay, you have this job to represent me. I want to see everybody, and I want proof of who you're meeting. I want to know, it's like, why are you meeting with this guy? Why are you meeting with that guy?
Privacy for the individual, transparency for the powerful is how it ought to be. And it's flipped right now.
Yep, and that's the pain that you would have when you're serving. It's like, okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to make some changes, I'm going to serve in Congress for 2 terms, then I'm going to leave. Because it would be painful. Because it's like people would be able to watch. Okay, he went into the bathroom. I mean, that's what I would do. It's
Imagine
it would be to that level.
Directly control where budget allocations happen as citizens. Yeah. What if your tax dollar? You could say, like, I disagree with the government doing this, so I'm not going to fund it. I'm going to fund this instead. Like, I don't believe in violence, so I'm not going to fund the military budget. Or I don't believe in social welfare programs, so I'm only going to fund the military.
And to this subject we're talking about today, the big issue is that right now, executive power can take one agency and say, you're going to do X, and it could be unconstitutional, and it doesn't really matter until after the fact if someone wants to bring it to court, and there's no scarcity. So it's like, okay, we need this money. Boom, there it is. You're doing this. We're going to have, however many 100,000 new people that are going to do this thing that never went through Congress, and the funding never went through
taxing
Congress.
everyone's savings account when you do that.
It's crazy.
And people aren't like whoever said earlier. People aren't taught that in school. People aren't taught that. Like,
Well,
we aren't taught scarcity economics. We aren't taught like, if this happens, here's how it affects you, or even how long these cycles take to reach you to where you notice it.
They don't even say anything about the money supply changing ever. Like there's like, it's not just not school. It's like monetary policy is something that is verboten to be publicly discussed. It's intentionally left obscure.
Mhm.
Well, the thing, Greg, being an attorney, I mean, you know that people have challenged what their tax dollars are spent on for religious reasons.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I don't want my money going for any of these things because it goes against my core beliefs. So I think with more transparency, you would definitely have more of that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think central bank digital currency can be good if it's used to shackle the government to the will of the populace more effectively. That is actually a really powerful point.
And I think it's very weird that we're like, our country doesn't have an internal affairs with all the agents, and there's like 40, letter agencies in reality, that we don't have one that just, looks for corruption within the government. Just like every, large police force, any power structure has someone who watches them.
Right. I mean, and there's like, it's like a big $10 word, right? Like, even what would that mean if we could actually have it in place? What would the oversight look like? What would that agency do? And we need to.
You muted, Joe.
We would need to come up with a definition for what corruption is, and have that be meaningful to what we think it is and what we see it as a populace.
All right,
it would be if they had. I mean, it's Congress is supposed to serve that role, right? The press maybe a little bit, but Congress is supposed to serve that role before those agencies get money. They're supposed to wait a minute. You guys screwed this up, and this is unconstitutional and or traitorous, and we're not going to fund it anymore. But they don't do that. They just write the check, move it on, kick the ball, and
so we get the Chevron doctrine, where the courts can't even question the bureaucrats.
Yeah, and it's crazy because if you did have in my opinion, if you did have an agency to do that, it would effectively just balloon like DHS did. It would maybe not even do what it's supposed to do. And I would even I would put money that it would actually go after the wrong people. because the very people who are corrupt are going to push it to go after the people that might call them out, right? That's what happens. So
oh yeah, selective enforcement.
We need less power. We need to start pulling power away from these agencies instead of putting, adding new ones to police the ones that are there. I mean, it's already crazy. And there are a lot of things that could be done in a traditional way that don't even involve blockchain, like what I've always called if you had an amendment to the Constitution that cited Jefferson and the refreshing of the Tree of Liberty, but it would be bloodless, and it would effectively say all laws will expire, and you have to come back in and proactively keep them going in front of everyone. Or else they can't keep going. So you would effectively eliminate 99% of all laws because most people don't want half of them or don't even know that they are there.
Right. And you'll get this response to this. We're like, well, how would you have all of these things that we do? The 20,000 commandments from one federal agency. You can't have that in a system that gets reviewed and oversighted and blah 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 blah. Well, exactly. We shouldn't have that much oversight.
Right.
I also think that the age of policy, as far as not laws, is ridiculous. It's like that government bureaucrats that are not elected, that are not in Congress, can make a rule. It's essentially a law. I mean, you can get in trouble for it, you can get fined for it, you can get arrested, and they're not like the CDC. They'd say something, and this is a rule. This is a mandate. That's just semantics, And
Is that by design? Is that because, like, back to Constitution, it says Congress shall make no laws that, well, if it's not Congress and it's not a law, is it
but
now?
even that, when Pelosi can stand up there and say, well, it's insider trading, but, it's no big deal. It's like, what?
Well, no, she said it was a free market, which is a lie.
When they first passed the mandates, they said, well, everyone has to do this or else, your business is shut down, blah, 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 but not Congress and not the, EPA or these people. It was all government people. It was so blatant that I was explaining to someone, I was like, they can't do that. That's like against like, what do you mean? I was like, Congress can pass no law.
Washington State people would tell me it's the law. I'm like, that is not a law. The governor does not have the ability to make a law. Right?
There's a difference between law. There's a difference between a law and a decree, and a decree may have legally enforceable ramifications because of a law that enabled that, but it requires a law to enable it. We're going to live in a nation of laws. Like, we literally can't have somebody whose job it is to decide at one moment what's legal and what's not. Their signature and announcement says, and this is effective, and it is. Like,
if there's any question for why they do not teach these things in school, that is the reason. Because when something happens, they can pull it out of their pocket and everybody's like, oh, it's the law. And I'm talking about adults and young adults, older, that's a law. And I'm like, that's not a law. Words mean something, right? So and that's why they don't want people to know.
Oh,
They don't teach. I've even talked to my kids. They teach very specific politically charged stuff in history class these days, and they tend to repeat it. It's the Civil War every year. It's about slavery every year. Nothing about civics. Nothing about the things that anyway.
Why do we talk about? Yeah, and why don't we
be an actual class that they would teach? Until in the 60s, people said, hey, you can't do that. And they changed stuff when it came to civil rights.
Right.
So they're like, wait, let's not teach civics anymore.
And notably absent, nobody's tested over the fact that we, through a CIA operation, deposed a democratically elected government in Iran that caused a whole bunch of blowback all the way through up to the, arguably up to the events of 9/11. And setting it in motion when we pulled Mossadegh out of power. Or we don't talk about the Gulf of Tonkin, where we basically literally staged ships being blown. Like, this is all stuff that comes out later and gets declassified.
That's a good point, man, because it's something that I didn't think about a lot of this stuff in the same way that I do now until I met my wife. She grew up in East Germany before the wall came down until she was 8 or 10 years old, something like that. And obviously she was young, so she continued in school. So she got education on both sides of the wall, basically, right? And in Germany, they do a very good job of teaching people how Germany screwed up, what they did that was bad, and how you should not hide these facts, but you should teach your children this so that we don't repeat the same shit over again, right? And that's not the attitude we have in the U.S. We haven't seen this major war in Europe over kind of thing in the U.S. Maybe that has something to do with it, but something about the fall of that and the rise of what Germany became after that war affected the education system there in a way that I do find myself talking to my German side of the family about cerebral things. They're they do seem to be thinking about stuff, and even national defense policy is informed by their whole, they got all these this wind power and so it's rolling out in Germany, and it continues to, and it's doing okay. It's actually not bad at all from what I've seen when I was there. And one of the angles on that is national security. It's like we can't be relying on energy from other countries and stuff. I don't know. I just like the way that the modern German thinks. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
Ever talk about mass formation at all?
Just one second. My dog is demanding.
I will tell you, a lot of the Eastern Europeans have interesting angles on that. I knew a guy at Disney that was not going to move his family over here until he could outright buy a small place and not have a loan because of what he had experienced growing up over there.
Right.
Very interesting stuff.
Germany's a really interesting thing when it comes to history because they've done arguably the worst things in all of history, but they don't hide it. If you go there, they're like, "Hey, look," and they don't say, "Look at what we did." It's like
no, it's very prominent and it's very.
They say this is a terrible thing that happened, but it's in the past. We didn't do it. I didn't do it. You didn't do it. That our country did it, but it's just terrible. Let's learn from it and never do it again. Whereas in the U.S., it's like, hey, these bad things happened, and it's your fault. It's a completely different way to look at history.
Well, and my question is this: is like in Germany, they talk about how the populace, how regular people started to go along with this, and how that actually happened, or do they spend a lot more time talking about the atrocities? So that we don't forget that it happened. Like, so I feel like there's a distinction there.
More the latter. More the latter.
The way that we have slid into what we're in right now, without getting, too into the whole apartheid society thing that's been set up globally, and in some cities in the U.S. Like, did they talk about Dave? Do you know? Like, I was really more a question for you. Did they?
Yeah, sorry, I had to get up for a minute. What was that? Yeah.
Did they talk about how regular people bought into it and talk about those dynamics? Because
I don't know. Like I would have to talk to her more about that. I'm not really sure.
I grew up there. I grew up there. It's much more the latter. It's much more. This is just a terrible thing. This can't happen again, and we can't forget it. But it's not about finger pointing. It's not about guilt. It's honestly like you go in there and it's more just this can't happen again.
So, there is guilt though, and I was going to say that the word "we" is definitely used a lot. Not they, as in the country, as in the politicians in Germany. It's more of an all-inclusive "we" as Germans did this kind of deal. So there is some guilt there. Like, I see guilt whenever I bring up topics with my wife where she's just like, yeah, we kind of did that.
Yeah, but you're not a German. In Germany,
oh, okay,
it's much more like slavery in the United States. There's slavery everywhere. We killed each other to stop it. We literally said, no, this is wrong. And then people that disagree, we fought our own families and killed them in order to stop slavery. It's the same kind of, and we should look at it more that way. That's kind of the way they look at it over there. It's like, this is a terrible thing, but I have nothing to do with it. I'm totally against it. No, it just, and I remember there was a movement when I was a kid to, shut down like Dachau and a lot of these, memorials because it's shameful. And there was just, everyone was like, no, it's our thing that we did, but it can't happen again. That's why we need to do this. Basically, if you try to hide it, you're not sorry. You're not accepting it. So
gotcha. The memorials they're large and they're somber and they're respected, and I've seen that for sure.
But isn't it fair? I mean, isn't it fair to say that in a way the raising of these monuments has occluded some of the individual work that needed to be done around, okay, so how did I, as a citizen with a family down the street from a targeted family, fall into a trap where I thought it was okay to stand by while they were loaded onto boxcars? Like how did those little dynamics happen to get to the place where...
I think Gina Carano said it best and then was quickly silenced.
Yeah, I feel like maybe that it happened is a lesson well learned, and that we ought to take it a little bit further and talk about how we can prevent it by understanding the dynamics that created it. Because I think that's what we're falling into.
It's always demagoguery. So it's the same thing you have now with the what they are trying hopefully unsuccessfully, but definitely there are a lot of people that fall into this with the vaccines.
Yeah.
They'd sooner see an unvaccinated person die than be healthy because they are wrong. They are horrible. They are evil because
I have seen some of that. Yeah, I have seen some of that of where you'd see news reports of like, look at all of these unvaccinated people who either, like they were harmed or they were in a like they're not having a good time, and you see people like, haha, see, they deserve it.
Right.
Those fuckers.
Exactly.
Like, what is that? What is?
It's well, I mean, mass formation psychosis. Basically, we have this need to blame somebody in order to have the system.
And that's fine.
People there. It is whoever's pulling the strings that has a need to separate people. So they will introduce ways to separate people. And that one's a particularly efficient one because there's health is the question. Right. As they can distort what is the science however they want, because there's plenty of distortion going on. Right. Lots of statistics.
So, does that not go back to education though? That we that on a larger scale, or like zoom out a little bit, like the underlying educational problem, people don't know what doing your own research even is. Right? People grow up today. You're born. You have questions, you reach into your pocket, you pull out the Hitchhiker's Guide and you say, what's the answer to my question? And your Hitchhiker's Guide says, oh, here's your answer from somebody on the internet. And you're like, oh, cool. Like that's where people are growing up today. And so I don't know that people know how to read scientific papers, how to decide just because it's a scientific paper, does that mean it's factual? What do the peer reviews say? That kind of thing.
Even if they could,
I was on a show. The other day.
Start a fight. Sorry.
We were looking at a project, and the person was like, "Yeah, this is great. This is great. Look, they've been audited." And I'm like, "Yeah, but did you look at the audit?" And they were like, "What? Like, just because it's audited doesn't mean it's good." And we clicked on it, and there was like 2 critical problems or 2 super bad problems that hadn't been fixed for like 4 months. There was like all these other problems. I said, see, the audit shows you that this is bad, but a lot of people just like, oh, it's been audited, so it's good.
Been audited. Didn't read the audit.
People don't know how to do their research.
Well, and there are
something interesting that Greg brought up, because now having lived in Germany and seen that, there's not a lot of focus on how things led up to that. I think because tinfoil hat, that if there was that education, then we wouldn't be where we are today here, because people would guard against that, and it's kind of mind blowing. I'm sitting here thinking about it, but that's like, oh no, we're not gonna. That's a tool that we all use. Let's not stop that.
Well, that's what I have against. And I'm not sure how this ties into CBDCs, but that's what I have against all of the statues that were pulled down and things like that, where it's like, oh, we shouldn't idolize these people, so let's pull their statues down. That's the opposite of what you should do. You should have a constant reminder of what you disagree with, so that it galvanizes you every day.
Start a tradition of throwing an egg at it.
I'm going to ask you something
with a message on it, shit.
I'm going to ask you something controversial then, because I agree. I'm a history guy. I don't think you should ever erase history. It should always be there. There are certain things. There are things the South should be proud of. There are certain things that are very interesting about the history with some of these people. Jefferson was a slave owner. I've been to Monticello, right? You can see where his slaves lived. That's horrible, but that doesn't mean that the guy wasn't.
His ideas.
He made an earth-shattering.
Ideas don't own slaves, man.
Yeah, right. And so. So one way or another, when you guys talk about Germany, you have a lot of restrictions on free speech around those very issues, which I think no matter what you believe, you shouldn't be arresting people for saying things. If it's true, it should not need censorship to survive. Right. So it's like, if you're going to do something, you should let it all be open, and that means also taking down these statues was absurd. And I had friends even that would say, it's like, oh, I think they should take it. I was like, it doesn't even make any sense.
I think part of the reason they shouldn't is because it connects us to those people. Yeah. I remember years and years ago, this is funny. I mean, it's bad, but it's dark humor. This guy was a neo-Nazi, and he was showing this dude a painting, and like these different paintings, and he's like, "Oh, this is really nice. Yeah, this is a nice painting. You like that painting? Yeah." Oh, he goes, "Oh, you like it? You've been enjoying a painting painted by Hitler." And the guy was like, "Oh my God, I'm so mad. I like that painting, and you bastard." But because we can separate ourselves, like
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Grant is good and Lee is bad, and most people that's it. Take this statue down. Do you know who was pro-slavery? Grant.
Oh,
Do you know who you can read the quotes? Lee is like,
Lincoln didn't even
I
want
would
to end
I would
slavery.
kill I would get rid of all slavery. I would have no slaves. It would end this war against brother versus brother.
Oh, with Lee, I was surprised that Lee was taken down. I guess I don't know why that surprised me, but
You get to the main point you made. People don't know how to do research. They don't care anymore.
Well,
And
and
that
to
was
bring
the
things
point,
back
by the way.
to central bank digital currency, guys, like in a society where it's this easy to forget all of those lessons and to start tearing things down, are we responsible enough to handle a thing that could be used as the ultimate tool of oppression when you get people riled up and demanding that we take this class of people and we cast them out of society? This would be the ultimate tool to cast people out of society with. And there would be people cheering for it and dancing on the graves of the starved families when central bank digital currency was turned off if you couldn't also prove that you had the I got vaccinated NFT.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And that's something that we're actually seeing, which I don't think any of us thought that it was a real possibility. That you can't buy food and you can't leave your house and your children can't do things. What was it? I just saw something that was like crazy about kids. Ronald McDonald House are kicking children out.
yeah.
Kids aren't vaccinated. Yep.
Oh, really? No kidding. Is that true?
I never thought we'd get to these kind of levels. This is biblical stuff, man.
Yeah, and let alone a lot of those kids can't get the vaccine safely because they have autoimmune. They have other. It doesn't even make any scientific sense at all. And maybe quarantine would make sense, but to say, oh, we're not going to service any of these poor kids that have various type because they're not vaccinated is freaking evil, probably. But maybe stockholders would wake up at some point. Who knows?
It's a useful tool.
I haven't heard of
who would
that.
Like to
Yeah, I just saw it today. I just saw it.
12X doesn't buy it. I'll have to look into it later. I'll have to do my own research. See.
Luke We Are Change from that We Are Change, the journalist, he tweeted about it. Just shocked me, blew my mind.
You said something about food, and access to food and resources you need to live and things like that. That's driven me to do things like we have hurricanes all the time in Florida, right? Just hurricane after hurricane. You'd think we'd move, but we don't. And what scares me, though, growing up with hurricanes in Florida, what scares me is not the hurricanes or the storms. What scares me is people, human beings. Mm-hmm. And what would happen, I think about this with solar flares, right? What would happen if we had a solar flare that directly impacted Earth, like it has before in the past, but today, where we have all this technology, and people now can't go to the grocery store and swipe their debit card to buy food for their family. They just can't do that. But that's the only way they know how to feed their family. That's the way that our system's been designed, how they've been taught, educated, indoctrinated, whatever you want to say. That's the reality that a central bank digital currency could impose selectively. You could be like, okay, who does the solar flare apply to? Not an actual flare, but who do we zap and say you're not allowed to participate anymore because you're bad and your social credit score says that you're working against society, so you're not one of us anymore, not a true American.
Right. Or a rule that says every time you access a site for the first time, it has to give you its unique NFT on the web. And it has to go into your central bank digital currency wallet. And then all of a sudden, this new class of site is classified as extremist or whatever. Somebody on it falls out of favor. Mm-hmm. They just do a lookup on all people who happen to be holding this token, and turn the switch. You're out of the economy.
Well, you think about it, it's like everybody's access to the internet is very well centralized these days too. There are very few independent mom and pop internet providers around the country, right? Almost everything is rolled into one of the big guys, and so it's an easy choke point for them to plug any of that in.
Is the metaverse a good way to like experiment with CBDCs? Because they all sort of have their own. It's a different thing, but
I will tell you, it surprises the heck out of me that, and maybe it's an indicator of the reality of the value of economics as a study, but why would you not have massive amounts of experimentation by economists? I'm going to prove what I've written about by putting this out in a digital currency, whether it's in a game, whether it's something else. Why have they not done that? It's been this technology has been here for a long time now.
We simulate things all the time to see how it would work out.
Right, but they don't actually test it in the real world. It's crazy.
Well, they're bound by the unfortunate short-sightedness of frequentist statistics and the modeling, right? Like they don't want real world complications in their research. It makes it harder to draw broad sweeping conclusions about specific things happening in specific controlled environments. They'd rather generalize how it works in society from a tabletop experiment, but where they can control the parameters.
Yep. It's closed systems. So we're at the hour and a half by governance. We will cut from here. So that's all the questions. Let's go around and get updates for this week. Dave, what's going on to everyone?
Yeah. So we are in the last stretch, I guess, of wrapping up the site-wide governance stuff for DIN Social. That's going to be out within the next couple of months, probably sooner than that, I'm sure. But we also have some other updates rolling out pretty soon. Like if you've been using our app at all, you'll notice that there's some differences between the app and the website, and some things that you can do on the website, like following somebody, for example, right? There's not a button on the app. So there's been a lot of like parity updates, so the app can get onto the level that the website's on, that kind of thing. So that's improved a lot. And then we're going to be making tipping IRL easier to do. So, we're implementing QR codes so that you can simply show somebody your QR code on your phone and they can be like, oh, that's you, bloop, instead of having to look you up and figure out what your handle is and things like that. And we're using all of that in a local, talk about, simulating experimentation to see how it works. We're using all of that locally here where I live. I've got 3 venues now. Last time I had 1, now I've got 3 venues that are down to experiment. We're doing that every month. And all of this stuff is going to be, my focus, I guess, is transitioning more into meat space, which is super exciting because I can talk to crypto people all day long about why DIN Social is uniquely positioned to be like just this mind-blowing social platform that nobody saw coming. But now I get to talk to normal people about it without using the word crypto or blockchain at all. Because that's what I've learned. You just don't use those words and they're willing to talk. And so, we're sneaking it in there. And I think an advantage with DIN is non-crypto people. I think it's a strategic advantage to have non-crypto people bootstrap it from the very beginning instead of just finding it later after a certain personality type has made it popular. So that's where this year is for me. And that's where, I'm excited about this year because I said it before, but I feel like we did a lot of R&D and we did a lot of fine tuning and we did a lot of what do people really, really want or need. And now we know that and we know how to measure that and we can implement that and start rolling with it. So the gloves are off for DIN. That's my update.
Excellent.
Cool.
Sean.
Just follow me on YouTube and Twitter for all the exciting things that I'll be doing. Also to JP12X.
Oh no, he got zapped by the Illuminati again.
Oh no.
We'll come right back to him. Greg.
I will be trying not to get zapped by the Illuminati. No, wait, not really. Rivet is about to launch our Cardinal update, which is going to go live first with our existing chains that we support, and then we're going to start rapidly rolling out EVM compatible chains as fast as we can churn them out. Nice. Exciting times for us and exciting times for people who want to build on a platform that is backed by open or powered by open source software so that you don't have to rely on us to continue to exist for your project to stay around and is hyper protective of privacy. Like you literally, I mean, you guys have heard me talk on here. You got me as the guy who's going to push whether or not we're going to capitulate on any of these points. It's not as good as a decentralized system, but I'll die on that hill, and we all will. So come check out Rivet if you plan on building anything, because it's going to be available on a lot more chains soon.
Excellent. That's good.
Thank you for doing that too. People like you.
That's very exciting. And with Dragonchain, it's beginning of the year, so everything's getting laid out for what's coming. Lots of very exciting stuff, including the public ones that everybody knows about, Den, and there are some things in core that we're looking at to really answer some of the questions for what we're seeing from real customers. So keep an eye out. Follow us. Follow me, Jojo Rowe. Follow Real Denizens, and follow Dragonchain on Twitter, LinkedIn, and everywhere else. Also, make sure you share this episode. The more views we get this week, the more everyone will get in lot. And that's what you should all want if you're participating. And thanks, by the way, for all the questions. Really good questions. And it's actually, I think everything's really improving. And make sure you go in and vote on the topics for February. So I think that's it.
I would
subscribe, like, everything else. Yeah, Greg.
One little thing, share this episode especially too, because I think we got some really great important things out there. And
today was a good episode. I enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed the dialogue for sure. Yeah.
Red pill some people with this conversation. Seriously.
Yes. Very good. Very good. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks a bunch. See everybody next week. Governance call Den later this afternoon.
Yep.
The first tap of a conductor's wand. The first rivet in a mile-high tower. The master link at the genesis of a never-ending chain. The moment a single empty canvas meets a singular master stroke. There is no one thing. Because now there are many. Because soon there will be more. Because one is ever the beginning. Like the first link in an infinite chain, or the first rivet in the tallest skyscraper. The master stroke is found in the masterpiece. What will you begin?